Apparently, the Russians are advancing even more, even faster, even more dramatically in the Zaporozhye region. And so I think it will be much more difficult for the whole Western powers that back Ukraine the narrative that the thing is a stalemate, that they could turn it around, they could defeat the Russians. The Russians are losing a lot of men, but they're not making any progress. It's clear that the Russian army is gaining in strength, not losing. Even in size, even size-wise, the Russian army is growing, which might indicate that they are perhaps even preparing for a large push to really push all the way to the Dnieper River. And I think that this will be a complete and total defeat of the Project Ukraine. If these reports are true, then the Western narrative collapses instantly because a force that's advancing faster and growing in manpower is not losing, it's preparing for something bigger. And if Russia pushes all the way to the Dnieper, that's not a setback for Ukraine. It's the end of the entire Western project around it. Washington and Brussels know this, but admitting it would mean admitting the war never matched the rhetoric. As far as Ukraine goes, that could be close to the end of war, So, maybe in a way, good news for Ukrainian people. The government in Kiev will have to change. It'll have to go back into Russia's orbit. But then that's the defeat for NATO and for the European Union and for Great Britain. I'm not putting the United States into that same category, because it's very clear that Donald Trump has extricated the United States from the conflict. If Ukraine is pushed back into Russia's orbit, the war ends, but it's political disaster for NATO, the EU, and Britain. And with Trump pulling the US out of they're left facing that defeat alone, which was not clean, obvious, and surgical, because the United States involvement in the Project Ukraine has already been set up and rigged so that it would be difficult for Trump to just say, okay, goodbye, we're done with this. So it took some time, but I think that the critical moment happened when Trump declined to provide a security guarantee to Kyiv, because that was the tripwire for World War II. That is, for an open conflict between Russia and the combined West. And Trump said no. So now all they're left with are measures of sheer desperation. So the last Mokin, Emmanuel Macron, still wants to finagle somehow to put French troops in Ukraine. But without the security guarantee from the United States, they will not achieve anything at all other than maybe get killed there. What he's saying is simple. Washington set up the Ukraine project in a way that made it almost impossible for any president to walk away cleanly. So Trump had to pull out step by step, and the real turning point came when he refused to give Kyiv a security guarantee. That refusal killed any chance of a direct NATO-Russia war. Now all the West has left, desperate gestures, like Macron talking about sending French troops. But without U.S. backing, those troops wouldn't change the outcome. They'd only become targets. If we go by historical precedents, I think that the idea that the Europeans have, like with World War I, World War II, is we're just going to get ourselves into a world of trouble, and then the Americans will not be able to just leave us alone. They're going to have to come to our defenses. So, this is all they have at the moment. And then So this gamble is that Trump will no able to resist the calls to come and rescue them. I don't know. That gamble might work out, it might not work out. But even if it did, even if somehow at the last hour they managed to bring the United States into that war, that still wouldn't be able to turn it around. I mean, Obama in 2014 declined to open a war against Russia because they understood that Russia has escalatory dominance in that region, that winning against Russia would be extremely unlikely. And I think that today, it's don't know what kind of a miracle it is. You know, Westerners are good at using printing presses, but you can't print logistics. You can't print weaponry. You can't print troops. Is gambling that if things get bad enough, America will be forced to step in like past wars. But even if they pulled the US in, it wouldn't logistics needed to reverse that. You can't print an Air Force anti-air defense and all of these things. You have to have them, and they have to be integrated. And that just doesn't exist. So even if the United States somehow was coerced into this war, I think the West would still lose. You can't manufacture an air force or air defenses overnight. And the West simply doesn't have the integrated structure needed for a fight like this. So even if the US were dragged in, the outcome wouldn't change. The West would still lose. So I think that there's a certain desperation to not recognize reality and just keep the thing going as long as possible. And then I think that those who are really the real instigators of this war, which I think is the financier oligarchy on the axis of London, Paris and Wall Street, as far as they're concerned, as long as the war is going on, the EU is a chance that Russia might fall, kind of a crisis. Vladimir Putin might be assassinated or die while in office. You know, something bad might happen, which would maybe open an opportunity for them. Some kind of an opening for them to again try to infiltrate Russia, to organize a regime change operation, to bring in some kind of Maria Corina Machado. You know, to the Kremlin. That would open the gates of Troy wide. He's saying the war is being dragged out in desperation, kept alive by powerful financial interests hoping Russia collapses from within or Putin falls. It's less about winning and more about waiting for a miracle that likely isn't coming, and then that they could take over Russia. And then, the dream continues, because then they would probably weaponize Russia against China in the same way that they've weaponized Ukraine against Russia. And they get their big prize, which is control over whole Eurasian continent. Well, that's a long, short dream, but it is possible for as long. Is continuing. And this is why we had that Project Alchemy in Britain, which was established at the beginning of the special military operation in 2022. A bunch of British academics, intelligence operatives, and military generals who basically put together like a strategic policy paper in which they emphasized in a few places that the key, the imperative is to keep the Ukrainians fighting. And this, coincided with Boris Johnson going to Kiev when the peace was already in hand. It was already, agreed upon almost completely in every detail. And then Boris Johnson came to Kiev and convinced Zelensky and his government, don't sign any peace. We have your back. Fight it out. So, 1 million or 2 million Ukrainian men later, they could find themselves in a lot of trouble because, they've done a lot of things wrong. They will not be able to conceal their role, to pretend that this was just a conflict